changes everyone and everything. Empires will rise, kingdoms will fall. The grounds of battle become stained with fire and blood. But our thirst for adventure, exploration, discovery, and conquest will stand the test of time. Together, we have battled through history. Now, a new age is upon us.
Decisive battles have happened in the same places. For India, this location is Panipat. Two battles that occurred there 3 decades apart changed the fate of the entire subcontinent for the next 3 centuries. Was just 11 years old when he inherited Fergana from his father in 1494. This conqueror, who would later be known as Babur, which means tiger in Persian, managed to take the traditional center of the region, the city of Samarkand, by his 16th birthday. Soon the enemies of Babur counterattacked, and he lost control of both of these regions. He had to find refuge elsewhere. Through many hardships, Babur was finally able to form a small army and took Kabul in 1504. Babur was too ambitious to be confined to his small domain, and he turned his attention to India. By 1519 he reached the Chenab River in modern Pakistan. The Lodi dynasty was struggling with internal dynastic strife, and a few of its representatives rebelled against the Sultan Ibrahim Lodi. They appealed to Babur, who used this to start his invasion. Punjab changed hands a few times until Babur became the master of this region in 1525. Ibrahim Lodi left Delhi early the next year and started moving to the north, while Babur moved to Panipat on the 12th of April. The two armies stood facing each other for 8 days, and the battle that decided the fate of these lands took place on April 20th, 1526. Babur's army consisted of Turks, Mongols, Persians and Afghans. It was built around a veteran corps which had been campaigning alongside him for over a decade, and thus the troops and commanders were confident and familiar with each other. Horse archers with their deadly Turco-Mongol composite bows formed the main body of the army, while his infantry consisted of foot archers also armed with composite bows and matchlock musketeers. Babur also had 20 cannons. He received his gunpowder weapons either from the Ottomans or the Safavids according to different sources. Babur's army and his tactics were a mix of 2 military traditions, the Ottoman and the Mongol Timurid. Meanwhile, the army of the Delhi Sultanate was based around war elephants and cavalry. This army was of a feudal nature and had no gunpowder units. Ibrahim Lodi's army at Panipat may be estimated to have had 50,000 men and 400 war elephants. Perhaps 25,000 of these were the heavy cavalry of Afghan descent, the rest being feudal levies or mercenaries of less value. The infantry was very much cannon fodder. Wait not while your foe fits arrow to bowstring, when you can send your own arrow into him. Babur had his cavalry in the second line divided into 3 groups, with his right flank next to the city of Panipat and his left side protected by a ditch and stakes. He and his guard were in the center. The first line consisted of infantry, which was stationed on wagons chained to each other, which turned each wagon into a miniature fortress and gave archers and musketeers much needed elevation. There were gaps left between the carts to allow cannons to shoot. Ibrahim Lodi's army had elephants in the vanguard, with cavalry in the second line and infantry in the third. The Sultan himself, with his 5,000-strong guard, stayed in the rear. He was sure that his numbers would decide the day, so he ordered almost all of his troops to attack head-on. The elephants in the front were scared by the unfamiliar sound of gunpowder and were stopped in their tracks, which bogged down the charge. Ibrahim's cavalry on the left flank attempted to attack the enemy's right, but the latter was reinforced from the center and this attack was repelled. As the elephants were either getting killed or retreating in panic, any semblance of order was lost, and Babur sent both his right and left flank cavalry to attempt a pincer move. That forced his foes' left and right flanks to turn towards the horse archers, and the Sultanate's army was pinned, leaving it open to shots from the wagons and artillery behind it. Babur himself joined the attack, moving his guard around the carts from the right side. The Sultan's forces were now half surrounded, and Ibrahim Lodi stepped forward to help the morale of his troops. But it was too late to change the course of the battle, and when the Sultan himself was killed, the action was over. The Sultanate lost more than 20,000 troops and ceased to exist, while Babur's Mughal Empire that replaced it had few casualties. Delhi was now under Babur's control, and in 1527 he scored another impressive victory against the local Rajput Confederation at Kanwar. This success once again showed the dominance of the Mughals' weaponry and tactics. Most Sikandar and re-established control over parts of northern India. Unfortunately for the Mughals, Humayun died in an accident in 1556. This allowed the Suri Empire to counterattack. Chief Minister Hemu moved swiftly and in early October of 1556 claimed Delhi. Surprisingly, he also declared independence from the Sur Empire and was coronated as king. The new Mughal leader, Akbar, was just 13 years old, but his guardian, Bairam Khan, was a capable commander. He moved the Mughal army towards Delhi. In early November, Mughal forces reached the area near Panipat and were confronted by Hemu. The Mughals were once again outnumbered, with something over 10,000 against 30,000 enemy troops. Bairam Khan selected a battle location with a deep ravine dividing the two sides to level the playing field. The Mughal army seemingly only had cavalry and elephants and was split into 5 groups of horse archers and a vanguard consisting of elephants, while Hemu had cavalry in the first line, infantry in the second, with elephants in front. Hemu himself was riding one of the beasts. The battle started with Hemu's right and left wing cavalry and elephants moving forward to attack their counterparts. This attack succeeded, and the Mughal flanks were forced to slowly retreat under this pressure. Bairam Khan sent his second-line cavalry behind the charging enemy to attack it from the rear. Mughal horse archers were superior to those of their enemy, and their volleys were more successful. So Hemu had to push back against the flanking forces, which retreated. The ravine was making it hard to mount a proper attack, and when Hemu decided to move forward, he had to move around it. Only a portion of his force was able to attack the enemy centre, and yet sources claim that the Mughal forces were on the brink of defeat. The battle was decided by an arrow that found the slit in Hemu's helmet. His army panicked upon seeing the death of their commander and broke their lines. The Mughals once again lost very few warriors while killing more than 5,000 enemies. Akbar continued consolidating territory, and by the time of his death, more than half of India was under Mughal control. The Mughal Empire lived on until 1857. Its dominance in the 16th and 17th centuries changed the course of history for the entire subcontinent. The Mughals altered the military, economic, and religious outlook of India, but their conquest wasn't unchallenged and was met with resistance in almost every region. In the second half of the 16th century, a loose alliance of Rajput princedoms stood in the Mughals' way, leading to the Battle of Haldigati. The Rajputs were members of a unique warrior society. Every male of the tribe was raised as a soldier, akin to the ancient Spartans, but Rajputs fought like the knights of medieval Europe and had a robust code of chivalry. They were predominantly a cavalry force, with a traditional Indian addition of elephants, and relied on their fortified castles for defense. Akbar managed to strike first. In 1561, his generals defeated the Sultan of Malwa, Baz Bahadur, at the Battle of Sarangpur, and conquered his kingdom during the next year. Baz Bahadur found refuge at the court of the ruler of Mewar, Uday Singh II. This was a good excuse to attack Mewar. However, Akbar's rule was challenged by his relatives and the Turkic tribes serving him. These rebellions forced him to cease his expansion until 1567. Despite being preoccupied with these matters, the Mughal emperor found time for diplomacy with the Rajput states, successfully vassalizing several. Mewar ruler Uday Singh was not going to bow to Akbar, and in 1567 the emperor decided to move against him. The Mughals had a decided advantage in numbers. They could have fielded a 100,000 strong army, while the Rajput leader had 20,000 at the most. Knowing this, Uday retreated to the mountains in the southwest of his kingdom in the hopes that his fortresses would be able to stop the invaders. In late 1567 and early 1568, Akbar's forces besieged Chittorgarh and Ranthambore. Both strongholds fell after a few months, but these sieges were still remarkable. For the first time in Indian history, engineers and artillery were used in a significant way against fortifications. Akbar and his generals employed the engineers to dig trenches and mines to reach the walls, and sappers destroyed the walls of Chittorgarh. Uday Singh's rule was broken, and as Akbar wasn't eager to fight in the mountains, he returned to his capital. The remainder of the Rajputs accepted Mughal dominance, with only certain clans of Mewar continuing their resistance. In 1572, Uday Singh passed away, and his son Pratap became the ruler. Akbar was eager to secure the road to Gujarat, and in 1576 he sent his general, Man Singh, a man of Rajput culture himself, to negotiate a vassal treaty. Some historians suggest that Pratap insulted Man Singh for siding with Akbar. Others claim that he just refused to become a vassal, but in any case, a war became inevitable. Pratap knew that he was severely outnumbered, so he set his forces at the entrance to the Haldigati Pass. Man Singh's forces approached the area, and the iconic Battle of Haldigati was fought on the 18th of June, 1576. There is a tendency among some historians to portray this battle as a symbolic religious conflict between the Hindus and the Muslims, but sources are clear that Pratap's forces had Muslim mercenaries, while a number of Hindu Rajputs fought for the Mughals. In this battle, Man Singh had 4,000 warriors from his clan, 1,000 Hindu warriors from other tribes, and 5,000 soldiers from the Mughal army. Although the Mughal artillery was nearby, it didn't participate in the battle, as terrain prevented Man Singh from moving it into position. The Mughal forces were built around cavalry, but also had a number of elephants and musketeers. Meanwhile, Pratap had around 3,000 cavalry, 500 archers, and an unknown number of elephants. The Mughal army had archers and musketeers in the front line, while the rest of the army was divided into 5 groups, with the majority of the forces on the left flank. Man Singh and his clansmen stayed in the centre. Pratap split his troops into 4 similar units, with archers in the rear. The positioning of the elephants is not clear, but from the events of the battle it can be deduced that they were either among the central units or in front of them. Pratap knew that he was severely outnumbered, and he started the battle with a full frontal charge with all of his forces. Their attacks swept away the enemy skirmishers and forced the right flank to flee. As the Rajput centre was stopped by the leading Mughal units, Pratap's wing joined the attack. The Mughal vanguard was soon reinforced by the centre led by Man Singh. This stopped the Rajputs' momentum, and the Mughals were able to reform their lines. Pratap sent in his elephants to attempt to break the enemy formation, but Man Singh countered this move with his own elephants. This point in the battle is reminiscent of a legend, with sources depicting the battles between monstrous elephants in detail. It seems that Man Singh was able to reform his flank and the musketeers, as while the former engaged the foe's left hand pinned it in place, the latter started shooting at the enemy elephants. The Rajput elephants were killed by the shots. It was time for a Mughal counterattack. Man Singh divided his reserves in two and sent them around his wings to attempt a pincer move. As the Rajputs failed to take control of the entrance to the pass, this maneuver worked. Pratap had to send more of his forces to the wings, and his weakened centre was attacked. Many Rajput leaders died in the encirclement, and Pratap himself was wounded and fell unconscious. It is said that Rajput cavalry started to retreat from the battlefield, and a few hundred archers volunteered to cover their withdrawal. Indeed, the archers managed to keep the Mughal forces occupied for some time, and that allowed more than half of the Rajput troops alongside their leader to escape. Soon, the mountainous part of Mewar was occupied by the Mughals. Pratap continued fighting a guerrilla war against the conquerors for the next few decades, and for a short time during the crisis in the Mughal Empire even succeeded in taking back most of the territory of Mewar.